for the cross-examination. Before you start your cross-examination, you can take up to 2 minutes to prepare if you want for preparation. If you want, it's not a must. If you feel that you're ready, the moment they're done speaking, you can go right ahead and start your cross-examination. So the rules remain the same. The motion is the same. And can we get a volunteer from either of the two sides? And maybe we give it a privilege to the only female debater to read out loud the motion for us.
The motion states that African states should require major extractive and land-intensive development projects to be co-governed by the state, private investors, and affected communities.
Thank you. So that is our motion. The rules remain the same, and we'll start with the affirmative side. The first speaker, whenever you're ready. I'll be smiling, but we are going to be very strict with time. Could you hear the bell? We're just trying it.
Yes, I could. Is this good? All right. Get my timer out. Given that everybody's ready, I'll begin. Oh no, sorry myself. Yeah. Wait, is the button? I'll turn mine off. Okay, I'm sorry. I guess we're doing mics today.
Before I begin, I would just like to thank our panel. Thank you to all the organizers of this tournament, and thank you to my opponents, and let's have a good debate. Okay, I'll begin my time on my next word. Panel, today I'd like to tell you a story. On May 1st, 2018, a 3-judge bench sitting in the coastal views of Malindi, Kenya, ordered the Kenyan government to pay $170 million in compensation to a group of roughly 4,600 fishermen. These men and their families had been displaced from Manda Bay and Lamu County, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, to make way for a modern deep water port under the Lamu Port and South Sudan Ethiopian Transport Corridor, also known as LAPSET. They were not opposed to development. They asked only that the development included them. The court found that it did not. Nyla Combe, writing in the Journal of Eastern African Studies, documented that the fishermen's case was not one of resistance on the project itself, but one of attempting to secure a greater share of the project activities, to direct it in a way that would include the locals, include their needs. The Kenyan government appealed the ruling. The fishermen remained displaced. This is the world that we are describing today, a world in which development happens to people rather than with them. African states should change this. This is exactly why we affirm. The core problem facing many African economies today is not the lack of natural resources, but rather the inefficient production and allocation of said resources. Weak institutions, corruption, political instability, poor local integration prevent extractive industries from translating the resources into broad-based development. Under our model, the major project decisions regarding the land acquisition, resettlement, environmental management, and revenue sharing require approval from all 3 parties, being the public sector, private sector, and these communities. To quickly go over these actors, as we recognize, the private sector, yes, is invested in making profit. However, we see that this could be a good thing for sustainability. Why? Let's say you're an oil manufacturing company coming in. You know you make money off your credibility, off your ability to transport these resources, or have these projects happen safely. So if they want more profit, then they're going to ensure the safety of this project. Similarly, we know that these community actors, they obviously are on the ground, they know what's happening, they want the best interest for their environment that they have to live on every single day. And state representatives in this capacity would be the environmental enforcement, things of that nature. Our diversion of developmental justice requires not merely the fruits of development be shared, but rather that those who bear the risk and the cost hold meaningful power over the decisions that produce them. Now on to my contentions, of which I have three, the first being more development. When communities are denied inclusion in decision-making for major development projects, they retaliate. States do not grow faster. They get litigation, delays, sabotage, and political resistance that make development more expensive and less successful. One of the largest barriers to economic development is community backlash. When communities have no meaningful mechanism to influence decisions affecting their land and livelihoods, they often resort to protests and litigation and other means. The lab set perfectly demonstrates this dynamic. Communities in Lamu did not oppose development itself, but rather they demanded participation in shaping it. Instead, exclusion generated years of legal battles, and ultimately the Kenyan court ordered the government to pay out 170 million in compensation, effectively defaulting the project. What we see is that the negative may argue that co-governance creates delays. However, we argue the opposite. Projects without community buy-in face far greater delays through litigation. By having all these communications up front with a tripartite government, we are proactive, they are simply reactive to the problem. On to my second contention. Money stays in Africa. Co-governance transforms extractive industries from enclave economies into engines of local development, and the evidence proves it works. Traditional extractive arrangements are dominated by governments and multinational corporations. Resources are ripped from the earth just to be exported out to, say, China, places like in Beijing or the United States, places where the money doesn't need to stay. The communities are left with a crater. We're trying to keep them inside. Having co-governance would mandate certain things that are not seen within this globe, such as local hiring requirements, local procurement commitments, skills training programs, domestic processing facilities, and revenue sharing agreements that actually reach the people. A peer-reviewed study published in the National Institute of Health examined two major mining projects in northern Canada, MacArthur and Diavik, where the indigenous minority communities there were reinvested back into. In both projects, the government took a less prominent role in resource management, allowing indigenous communities to hold a stronger role in governance. Both communities built formal partnerships with mining companies around socioeconomic benefits and environmental monitoring. The results were not marginal, they were structural. At Diavik, the socioeconomic monitoring agreement negotiated because people had the ability to govern, locked in the binding local hiring commitments. As of 2022, Diavik has spent $7.1 billion with other northern businesses, 3.6 of that generated revenue and that spending going back into the people. We're seeing more schools, more health programs being made, education, jobs created, and all of this is due to having that co-governance, having that generation of wealth that comes with it. Now the workforce is also 24% indigenous and 22% women, both above sector averages, because the community had a seat at the table with those terms written. Instead of functioning as a narrow pipeline for government revenue that can be siphoned by elites, co-governance make extraction a catalyst for broader productivity. We are now becoming more economically diverse. We're not just sticking to these extractive products, rather we're seeing the implementation and expansion of other things in the industries that I mentioned. On to my third contention. Co-governance creates development, justice, and long-term stability. What we see is that co-governance is the only model that aligns development with the interests of the people who bear its cost. Communities frequently bear the concentrated burdens of development, displacement, environmental degradation, loss of livelihoods, water contamination, disruption of social and cultural life. Yet under traditional governance structures, they often receive little influence over project design. Communities are uniquely positioned to prioritize long-term sustainability because they must live with the consequences of this extraction for generations, which is exactly why those people experiencing them should make the decisions, and that is why I'm so proud to propose.
Thank you. Side opposition, ready for cross-examination? Go ahead. 1 minute or 2 minutes? You're ready, all right. Turn it on.
It's working now. All right, I begin in 3, 2, 1. So in African states, we often have the local government, which is very different from, foreign countries. So local governments, they usually hold the very same roles of, engaging with community. So how is your structure different from that?
Okay, so the tripartite model that we're adopting, if that's what you're asking about, we'll see that like it'll be a three-stage board. We'll see that we have the public, we have the community, and then we have the private investors voting on decisions for these companies. It looks like a 30-30-40. So what we'd see is like the representatives for the community would be elected through the same voting process, and then we'd have like a 40% share for the community, 30-30.
That's really awesome. But look, in Zanzibar right now, that is exactly what the local government's role is, like the lowest form of government. It's just your average farmer. He makes sure that the other farmer doesn't have, bad stock this year, and just making sure that everything is going okay. And they're the ones that they're the direct communication line with the government, and the government is the one that does it with the. So it's very similar until now. So we don't see how you implementing this new thing is going to be revolutionary to African countries like Tanzania or Kenya.
Wait, so what's the question?
That they're very similar roles until now. So how is yours different? It's okay. The affirmative is defending, key term, the power of veto in the community. And so far your governance scheme is sounding a lot like let's just hear the people out. What is it that they want? And where does the key term veto, how is that, like the people just say no and it goes no?
Yeah, so I didn't actually even mention a veto in my plan. I said that they have a voting share, and I said that they have majority voting share.
Having a tripartite co-governance means the people have a veto.
No, it just means that they have the ability to vote on issues that would prevent things that harm them. It doesn't
Okay, so if the
necessitate a
community
veto.
says no, we don't want this, the government and the private equity can just decide no, if it's good. We're still going to do it regardless, right?
That's literally not how that works, though.
Okay.
Like, so the model
No,
that
I'm just confirming if that's okay. Can you give us an example where tripartite co-governance has succeeded?
I can give a couple of examples. So, like, one of the things that we have in our case, or that my partner will get to later, or could have got to later, is whatchamacallit? What the fuck is it? I'm trying to remember the country name. Oh yeah, okay. I was trying to remember a specific country, but we can use the Canada example because it adopts a similar model.
That's all right. We can get it from the second speaker. I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So we now would like to invite first speaker from the opposition side.
Testing. I begin in 3, 2, 1. Social justice is not achieved by giving every stakeholder unemployment, inadequate infrastructure, the lack of industrialization. A governance model should be judged primarily by whether it improves people's lives. Mandatory co-governance risks delaying projects that provide electricity, roads, jobs, water systems, and public revenue. Justice is not about who sits at this decision-making table, but is about whether people actually gain access to these economic opportunities and essential services. Now, despite multiple initiatives to adopt power sharing in many countries, its implementation has never been smooth. Many divided and pluralistic societies have encountered notable power sharing failures. That was Kotse in 2017. Several factors engineered the failure of a plethora of power sharing. For example, on multiple occasions, the power sharing attempts appear to be weak and not institutionalized. That was Siram and Zahar in 2009. The Wikipedia article on Ethiopia's Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam covers how strong state-led development can advance social welfare on a massive scale. The project was not governed through mandatory tripartite authority, yet it promises expanded electricity access, industrial growth, and development opportunities for millions. A system that delays such projects in pursuit of perfect participation may ultimately harm the very populations that social justice seeks to help. Number 2, mandatory co-governance creates gridlock, uncertainty, and development paralysis. Extractive and land-intensive projects already involve complex environmental reviews, financing arrangements, engineering requirements, regulatory approvals. Adding a legally empowered third party, almost veto player, increases the likelihood of bargaining failure, litigation, indefinite delays. Development projects often require long-term planning and substantial capital commitments. Investors may withdraw if decision-making becomes unpredictable. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm from Zanzibar. Currently, the Maisaria area, which is a very prime location that was severely underdeveloped, has become leveled and sold off to infinity developers in Dubai. When I first saw this, I was like, whoa, why are we just giving up this land to UAE to build an international school and luxury apartments? But I became reassured when I realized that the Zanzibari government has a law stating that if they do not complete their development in that area within the next 2 years, the land goes back to be repurposed for the people. And as of a YouTube video published by South Africa Broadcasting Corporation, as of 7 days ago, reported by Nosifo Radebe, South Africa's mining sector has repeatedly faced uncertainty due to prolonged disputes over licensing, consultation, regulatory requirements. While consultation is important, transforming every affected group into a formal sort of co-governor risks creating a system where projects become impossible to implement. Social justice cannot be achieved if essential investments never get to materialize. My third point for today is that there are better alternatives than mandatory co-governance. The motion creates this false choice between co-governance and almost exploitation. No, the negative can support strong environment regulation, mandatory consultation, compensation schemes, benefit sharing agreements, judicial review, community development funds, free prior informed consent where appropriate, and anti-corruption safeguards. Lots of things that we see available on the negative side. These mechanisms protect communities without creating this rigid governance structure for every single project. Now, despite multiple initiatives to adopt this, we've seen that it does not work. An article by David Asmuda and others on UCC Law Journal in 2020 over Ghana's mining framework perfectly illustrates how this approach is going to work. While far from perfect, community protections, environmental oversight, compensation mechanisms, and regulatory institutions provide avenues for accountability without requiring equal governing authority between investors, the state, and the community. The question is not whether communities deserve protection. Of course, communities deserve protection. The question is whether mandatory co-governance is the best way to do it. The negative shows that more flexible and targeted alternatives can deliver both justice and development. That's the end of my speech. Thank you. Yep. We could just you ask the question.
I mean, I can also just leave him audible then. Time starts now then. All right, let's begin. I believe you just said that it's development outcomes that are the most important thing. Is this correct? You said that development lifts people out of poverty. Is this correct? You said that it improves people's lives. Would it be fair to say then that we can simplify this debate down to who does more development for the people then?
Yeah, we could say that.
Okay, and so on side affirmative, if we're able to prove that we do more development, do we win the debate? And then same for you, obviously.
If you can prove that you can do more development in a legitimized way, sure.
Then we win the debate. That's wonderful. All right. The next thing that you bring up is this idea of delays, I believe. You talk about time frame. Why do you think time frame is so important?
We're talking about Africa as a whole. Things are very urgent here. We're struggling with poverty, et cetera, et cetera. So of course time is of matter.
Okay. And so when time is of the matter, you would say that delays are bad.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know some things that can lead to delays? These are things like sabotage, protest, litigation. These are all things that you would say are bad as well because they cause delays.
I would also say empowering local elites through co-governance would also cause the same amount of delay, if not worse.
I mean, I don't know if you've given evidence for that yet, but that's fine. But you
We'll
would
add
still,
on with our second speaker.
That's fine. That's sufficient. But you would still admit then, at the very least, that things like
I
protest
think
and
delay
sabotage
is
are
on
bad.
both houses. We have it on both sides.
Okay.
If you can prove that your delay is less than our side, sure.
Okay. So then we would be winning on that point of the debate then.
I'm noticing a lot of we will be winning,
I'm just
but
asking you
if
questions.
you, because keep in mind, time frame, corruption, these are things that are both available on both houses. So we cannot say you're going to be winning. I haven't seen any of these points yet. When you do see them, sure, why not?
Okay. Wonderful. We have 2 minutes. I believe you said this idea of investors may go elsewhere. Where do you think these investors may go?
I don't think I said investors will go elsewhere. Sorry, what are you talking about? Investors will go elsewhere?
You had a point about capital flight in your plan, and you said that you'd be losing out in it in our world. Why do you think this is likely to occur? And if so, where do they go?
This is also very prominent in your world because through co-governance, if we're seeing local elites empowered and communities are the ones giving a veto and saying we don't want this, that's when local investors are going to
I'm really
leave or
confused.
international investors are going to
I keep
leave.
asking you questions, and your only response is, you guys are the same. At no point do you ever seem to directly answer it, whether it be for anything. This is quite fascinating.
Okay, my question is pretty simple. I just want to make sure I can get this straightened out before I go speak. Can you just explain exactly what are like the planks of your model as it stands currently? Like, what are you proposing on the opposition side?
What we're proposing is that a community doesn't need a veto because on our side of the house, the community can still have a voice. They can still be, what's the word I'm looking for, man? Look, your issue is whether social justice can be achieved through co-governance or not. We're telling you that these three tri-parties, they don't need to have an equal amount of power or say. It's all about giving the community a voice. If that's your issue, our side of the house does the same. What is your house doing different?
My next question to you is, then, like, if you're not, what are you actually proposing on your side of the house that you're changing in the status quo? What's the difference?
There's multiple things I said, like anti-corruption laws, stronger policies, regulation that can be implemented. We're talking about Botswana that's done this. We're looking at Namibia doing this. South Africa has done this. There's so many cases where this comes in. Your side of the house is trying to take the problem and put cheese on it and say it's over. But we're trying to solve the root
My
problem.
next question is pretty simple. How are you going to plan to enforce these policies that you're saying you want to bring on your side of the house?
The same way they've been imposed in countries like Botswana and Namibia through cooperation between the community, the government, and these independent parties.
Give me just 1 second. I'm sorry. Let me get my timeout. Yeah, the mic right here. Okay. Oh yeah, I'll grab it. Yeah, I'll grab it.  'Cause, 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 'cause,
Okay, I'll begin on my first word.
They destroy our lands and call that progress. Unchecked development is reckless and unsustainable. The precise reason we need shared governance is that everyone is checked. We must balance all interests and ignore none. That's why we stand for an affirmative ballot today. So before I get into my speech, let me just tell you what I want to do for you today. I just want to quickly do some refutation on their case, then try to explain and expand on our case, including giving actual co-governance examples that have actually worked in the status quo, showing why it should be institutionalized across all of this continent, and then doing more refutation, right? So just going actually off bat, right? Mandatory co-governance, right? They try to say that we don't provide any actual examples. Here's the country we're talking about when we're talking about this mandatory co-governance. We give two examples, right? First one I want to give is, again, Canada, right? Now, here's what I want you to understand. I recognize that Canada may sound like a white country. Here's what's happening. In Canada, then just the white government in Canada gave co-governance rights to the indigenous people in Canada, the brown people that had been there before colonization in order to work with the diamond mines that were coming into the region. This collaboration rather, quite literally led to $7.1 billion of profit in the region. What we talk about in this thing is not just profit. We told you that it was local hiring, like trainings. It was procurement committees. It was skills trainings programs. It was domestic processing facilities, revenue sharing agreements that actually reached the people. We talked about all these things, but they seem to ignore it as if it didn't matter, right? But I have another example actually that I think is also very useful for this debate because it's also from this continent. We saw happening with Project Lake Eterna wind power in northern Kenya, right? So this is a place where essentially a wind power plant was built and the community was given a 5% stake in the makings of this power plant, right? What we saw happening is that the plant was able to be built. We saw it was effective. This is a direct example of an effective model, right? Mind you, at the end of that process, he said that we want to have a model where we're having the government, the investors, and the state in the community all working together, but that's literally what we're arguing for today. That is the tripartite model that we're talking about, right? That being said, let me get into some more refutation before I move further, right? So I think a couple of things I just want to get onto. Number one, they kind of try to stipulate a plan where they say that they achieve their mechanisms via like anti-corruption laws, through policies, through environmental regulations, right? I mean, all three of these things have been proven in the status quo to not work, right? We talk about anti-corruption laws. Like, what does that even look like? Who's forcing it? Is it courts? Is it police? Is it armies? We don't really get a justification for how that works, right? For environmental regulation, recognize that environmental regulations are notoriously ineffective at actually getting anything done. Most countries in the world, including the U.S., the West even, we don't typically listen to them, so I don't understand how they intend to enforce them on the African continent without any actual other mechanisms, right? So this plan, or whatever you want to call it, seems to just fall out the round. Now, moving forward, right, they also try to create this argument saying that, my partner got them to concede that whoever can argue that their side has less delays is the side that wins. And let me tell you, our side is the side that has less delays, right? What happened in my partner's speech? The first one was that we were told that the LAPSET project, the LAPSET corridor in northern Kenya, was actually defaulted on because they had to pay 170 million USD to the fishermen that were displaced from the region, right? What this means essentially is that we see that when people are displaced from the regions, when they are displaced from the projects, when they're not allowed to participate, they take other metrics. They do things like litigation, political violence, protests. All these things tend to stall the actual development of set projects. And what that means essentially is that we're actually going to see more delays on their side of the house because without this co-governance model, what we see happening is that these projects just stop altogether, right? So quite frankly, I don't see how this argument flows through, but let me just read off some more about, again, why I believe this to be the case. Right. So moving forward, community governments will slow or block necessary development, right? This empirical premise is entirely wrong, right? I think, again, we also talk about the LAPSET fishermen, but also the Niger Delta communities. The communities across the continent represented in this debate, they did not oppose development. They just wanted to be a part of the development. They demanded inclusion in it. The research evidence consistently shows that communities resist not the projects, but the exclusion. Include them and resistance collapse. Exclude them and resistance becomes existential for the project. Second, the model answer. Our co-governance structure gives communities approval authority over land acquisition, resettlement, environmental management, and revenue sharing, right? Not to unilateral veto over whether any project proceeds at all. Mind you, they tried to argue that we said we were arguing for a veto. We never said that, right? This is the difference between co-governance and veto governance. Communities can shape terms. They cannot indefinitely obstruct nationally authorized development that meets minimum standards. Third, the democratic legitimacy argument. If a community uses their governance authority to reject project terms that a corporation finds unfavorable, that is not a governance failure. That is governance working as intended. The corporation is then required to negotiate better terms. Better terms for communities are better terms for the country, right? Development that benefits local communities does not to be imposed by force, right? It's force. Now, last, the long-term stability argument. Development that is imposed over community objection creates ongoing instability, right? I told you, political resistance, violence, international reputational cost, and eventually reversal. The history of African extractive industries is literally littered with projects that were approved without community consent and then became permanent sources of regional instability. Now, here's the thing, and here's how I'm going to close out this round. Recognize what our model is advocating for. The government and the investors have, or rather the investors have a want to make sure that on the world stage they don't appear unethical, right? So we're talking about these projects that we're seeing happening. Number one, the investors want to protect their reputation. If these projects are fraught with like political violence and distraught and people being displaced, these investors are much more likely to pull out of the region. Also, if these investors see that their projects are just being defaulted on entirely, they're going to start divesting away from Africa and moving to other regions where their investments are much more secure. What this means essentially is that both the investors and the government have a reason to listen to the people because they recognize that if they don't, the projects are actually much more likely to turn over and end up with no developments at all, right? And for all these reasons and more, I'm happy to propose. Thank you.
So, according to Gentoft in 1989, co-governance has to include a considerable degree of responsibility for resource management by the users, responsibility for resource management, and it should not only token consultation over the people by outsiders, like they have to have some form of power. So when you take away that veto, what is the point of this tripartite?
Actually present terms that are favorable towards including things like education, better healthcare, better infrastructure, better jobs even, that are going to actually...
So what do you say if they could do this without the tripartite?
This one. Okay. What's your question?
If the community could have a voice and have these direct negotiations with the government without the tripartite, do you say we would take this side of the debate?
And you can argue that, but again, the status quo shows that isn't the case at all. And you haven't really presented too much of anything new, so I don't see how we get...
See, in the first cross-ex, I did mention that in Africa, the local government, that is literally their job to speak for the community.
All of Africa.
I can speak for certain on Tanzania and Kenya.
Okay, well, those are 2 countries out of 55, so I think it's a bit...
So if we were to bring in more sources, would we take the debate then?
Still not necessarily, because, I mean, all you're telling me is that, like, local governments can still talk to the higher governments. Recognize, I'm not sure if it's the corruption debate, but recognize that in the status quo, corruption being so right as it is...
Corruption is available on both houses. Once again, the question is raised that if we still give the community a voice without this tripartite, do we take the debate?
No.
Okay, cool.
Is that all? Yeah. Oh.
Thank you.
Just before it starts, thank you to the organizers. It has been a very, very amazing tournament. I love it. And to my teammates who've been very, very incredible. And we are taking this. Yeah. And to the audience as well for giving us your time. We thank you. And to, yeah, I think that is enough. So I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, let's realize, let's assume that we give them the power that they talk about. But the assumption that they have is, at the point in time we give them this power, all these problems that we are talking about are going to run away from us. That is not the case. Because the kind of characterization that they give regarding how these, like the co-governance works, they say that let the communities be given that power to advocate for the challenges that they face, such as like lack of schools, lack of healthcare, lack of infrastructure, etc. We tell you on our side that we have better alternatives for that can still work between the government and the investors. This one, the only issue that we have is like we just need to work on the policy and the regulation. That is the most important thing that we need in order for these things to function. And we don't see the need of co-governance because at the point in time you're included, it doesn't mean that you're going now to like you have absolute power. But I think the other thing that I want to rebut, because they come and talk about like at the point in time, like you have this co-governance. If a project is supposed to be carried out within a particular community, it is a guarantee that the investors are going to get that opportunity. We tell you that is not the case because you are the three of you possess that power. If the community says that it is going to hammer steel, it is going to be deterred, it is not going to happen within that community. We don't think that that is particularly true and it doesn't stand anything. So on the issue of approval, still approval must ensure that all these like that projects meets like the environmental needs, like the ethical concerns. That is when you get this approval. So it is not a zero-sum game that we are arguing here, and that is particularly important. But I think when it comes to distribution, because most of these affected communities, the thing that they need is the distribution. They need like equity in terms of the assets that the country, that the nations have. Let me give you a good example. It is like in Rwanda. Rwanda things are working now. It is because of the policy regulation that has been implemented by the government. It is not like the community engagement that these people claim it is working, and that is particularly frayed. And we think that the key issue is not just like including these people in decision making, but just amending the regulations and ensuring that they're working for the best interest of the citizens, and that is particularly important. But I think the other thing, just to add on our case, that I want to discuss here is, it is like democratic states already possess the strongest claim to legitimacy, to represent and work for the best interest of the citizens in terms of the distribution of the resources, like those forgotten corners of the countries, like Turkana as they talk about. I come from Kenya. I've been to Turkana so many times. The key problem is there is no that community inclusion. It was just through the members of the county assembly of Turkana who came up with that proposal that we need to be included. So the veto power, I don't think that it is necessary. At the point in time, we have the political leaders who come from these particular areas who are able to push these agendas in order for them to realize like the core mandate that their citizens have to represent the interests of the people. But lastly, I think just on the idea of accountability, I think the government still has that incentive, because like what is happening in Kenya right now, the government, if you're not doing development in this particular area, they're telling there is this fear of you losing election after that 5 year. So after those 5 years, so it keeps on checks and balances because you still possess that interest interest for you to win that particular, to secure your seat. So you have incentive at least to push development and the distribution like within your counties. I think the other thing, I think just evidence to this is like an article on international idea by Shaviok and Christopher Vandome, 2024, Botswana's management of its diamond sector demonstrates the advantages of strong state leadership. Through state institutions, diamond venues were transformed into public investment in education, healthcare, infrastructure, poverty reduction. This one did not entail the idea of community engagement. It was just about putting forward like proper regulation and policies and pushing them to ensure that they come into pass. So debates on regulatory changes have taken place alongside the finalization of a new deal between DBS Group and the government, which has negotiated for a large portion of diamonds to be sold through the state preferred channels. This deal has brought considerable attention. Writing in Business Day, Simon Wolfe noted that the BOS has given Botswana stability, investment in healthcare, infrastructure, and education, economic status, and outsized soft power on the world stage. Economically, culturally, and politically, soft power on the economically, culturally, and politically, the two are intertwined. If the partnership crumbles, both parties will suffer, and so will the natural diamond industry. Hence, this one gives the two states, like the government, as well as the investors, like that incentive to work in order for them to honor that particular policy. So this development success did not depend on mandatory tripartite co-governance. Justice can be achieved through capable and accountable state institutions that distribute benefits broadly across the society, and that is the most fundamental thing that we need. But on their side still, I think we are able to achieve that representation. I think the veto powers that they are claiming, that at the point in time the community. Oh. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, I just have a couple questions for you. So,
Okay, let me just.
I'm sorry, I am ready. I was just going to answer. My apologies. Are you good?
Yes. Okay, let me just drink some water. Yeah.
Okay. Are you good? You're drinking water. Okay.
Yeah.
My bad. Okay, first question. So I believe you used Ghana as an example that benefits your side, saying that they have a strong state, correct?
I didn't mention Ghana, it was Rwanda.
Rwanda. Oh, okay. No, honestly, that explains it. I thought you said Ghana. That's my bad. Okay. Second question, actually, just to get into the redistributive policies. You do make an argument that you want to have redistributive policies on your side of the house, correct?
Between the government and the private investors, because the government has the power to make regulations on how like this investment is going to happen. It has the ministries, like the Ministry of Land and Environment within various states in Africa, like in Kenya we have that, and through those regulations you are able to circumvent all the problems.
Yeah, that's efficient. I just have a question. So, just to run me by your model again, you're essentially just implementing and/or strengthening policies for like corruption, anti-like regulations, correct?
I think corruption is a symmetrical thing. It happens on either side, so you cannot base on that.
So
But
I'll ask my question again. So your plan or your model is essentially just implementing stronger policies, right?
that is what we said.
So yes, that's your model. That's the entirety of it.
No. I think you listen to the model that we gave, so that is not the entirety of it. I explained to you that.
Okay, so
Can I explain?
no, it's fine. It's fine. We can just say it's a portion of it. Okay, so like, how are you enforcing these new policies that are being given?
I think I give you a good example of Rwanda, the way it was initially. Like it was like the government was able to come up with proper policies to ensure that if we have these resources, it is equally, like it is distributed to those areas that have been affected by calamities or need some like infrastructure to be constructed there, and that is how it has been able to be achieved.
Okay. If this is true, then why has income inefficiency in Rwanda become worse?
There is no in Rwanda. I think right now most of the people. That is why someone like Paul Kagame is being elected every single time, because he has passed those regulations that are able to benefit the minorities within that particular those affected communities. So
Right. So
because, okay, I think the difference is on your side, you think that when we give the veto powers to the citizens, all these problems are going to go away. Yeah.
What mechanism you're using to enforce? Is it the courts? Is it international courts? State courts? What is it?
It is just giving powers to the ministry. Okay, this is something that is status quo, right?
So it's laws with no enforcement mechanism.
Say it again.
So it's laws with no enforcement mechanism.
Precisely.
Okay, I'm done with the line of questioning. If you guys have
I got one more question. Okay. So just to make sure we're clear, you were still arguing that on our side of the house we're proposing a veto for the communities, correct?
Say it again.
You were still arguing that on our side of the house we're still proposing a veto for the conflicted communities, correct?
Okay, I don't think that I have to defend on your side. What we are saying is that if it is sufficient for the government and these investors to work if we have the proper regulation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Who were you speaking into? Was it here or here? This.
Maybe you can take this one.
I guess we'll find out. Is this on? It is. Thank you. We will begin in 3, 2, 1. There's a community living next to every mine, every oil well, and every large-scale agricultural project that this motion addresses. The people there did not choose to live above a mineral deposit. They did not negotiate the borders that placed them there, but they will live with the consequences for the rest of their life. Their children will drink the water, their farmers will work the soil, and their elders will remember. The negative asked this chamber to tell those communities, you have no voice, you have no vote. Trust the state, trust the process, trust the people making decisions that put you in this very predicament. The affirmative rejects this message. We hold that communities deserve more than a voice, they deserve a seat at the table where decisions are made. Not because they're experts in mining, not because they've gone through decades of academia, but simply because they're human. And it's because we care about people that we reject the negative case, because they don't lead to the improvements of material conditions. There are 3 ways I'm going to talk about this. First, the economy, then the environment, and finally, government accountability, and they fail on all 3. First then, with the economy, what do we see here? They say infinite delays on our side of the house. They say resources are needed now, and yet they're not provided. What do we tell you causes real delays? We tell you disruption by the community in protest, strikes, sabotage. My partner told you about the Lapset project. I don't know if he got there, but at the very end of the project, because they had to pay out $170 million, it closed down. It means no development happened. That's really what this debate is about. Moreover, we create economic diversification, meaning the benefits extend far beyond only extractive industries, as we have local hiring, local procurement, skills training, and domestic processing facilities. Then moving on to investors, we say that projects with strong community support face a lowered risk of disruption and legal challenges and reputational damage. As a result, they attract a broader pool of investors and gain access to cheaper sources of capital. Lower financing costs mean more projects become more economically viable and governments assume less debts and development can occur on a larger scale. Moving on then to the environment, what do we see here where they spectacularly fail? Corporations often prioritize quarterly profits. Politicians care about their next election cycle, but communities have to live with the consequences for generations. Because local populations depend on agricultural land, water resources, fisheries, and tourism, they possess extremely strong incentives to protect environmental quality. Community-governed projects are therefore most likely to adopt sustainable processes and demand stronger environmental standards. What do they tell you on their side of the house? They say, we just need more red tape, we just need more laws on the books. But words on a page don't do anything unless they do something, and for the next 3 minutes, we're going to talk about enforceability, which is the crux of the entirety of the opposition case. When they talk to us today, they say the only thing that matters is development. They talk about outcomes. Notably, though, they have no research, no statistics that actually back that up. We tell you enforcement is the only way we do this. Let's talk about corruption. Over and over again, they keep telling us corruption is the same on both sides of the house. Rather than even trying to defend themselves, they instead just say, you're just as bad. What are we doing here? Let's tell you why they're so much worse. We tell you it's true that all groups are self-interested and that they oftentimes want to benefit themselves. But it's precisely because of this that we want to include more actors. On our side of the house, actors with competing claims come into contention with one another, meaning no one entity gets everything they want. Communities don't get unlimited money, governments don't just get to bulldoze through, and investors don't walk away with everything. But what this leads to is checks and balances. It means that everything is balanced out. What instead do we see then in their model? And truthfully, there's a lack of anything going on. Instead, they say that like the courts, maybe environmental standards, this will all work. And yet they couldn't name a single time this has actually happened. All they can give you is sort of one-off examples of it happened here or it happened there. I believe my partner, I believe it was brought up in the Rwanda example, where they said, it's been effective in Rwanda. My partner said to them, If that's true, why has income inequality gotten worse? They tell us that these plans work, and over again we see that they do not. The negative had a very simple burden. Prove that production and allocation of resources can occur on a larger and more equitable scale. When it comes to the larger scale, they've clearly failed here. We prove that because of things like disruption, because of things like delays, because of projects shutting down, they can never do that. They scare off communities, they scare off investors, and the government has no sort of formal capacity. And then when we talk about being equitable, when we talk about this allocation of those resources that they truthfully do not have, what does this look like? We are the only moral team here today. We tell you that when extraction affects a community, they must have a say in it. They bring up these ideas of democracy and other notions, and yet this is the most anti-democratic thing I could ever imagine. As it's clear they failed at both their claims, it's the very clear affirmative ballot. Thank you.
Thank you, Team Affirmative. You need your 2 minutes, 3 minutes? You can have up to 3 minutes if you want. Okay. Yes.
Now, why would we allow good intentions from bad information? It's very important to understand that intentions alone are not going to work today. First, let me go through a few clarifications before I go into the substantive material of my speech. There was an issue that was raised that was very important for our information that was about implementation mechanisms, right? They asked you a question. What do we offer in terms of implementation mechanisms? And then they conclude that, well, implementation framework, a model that already has the power to implement policies. We're telling you there's a lot more room for improvement in powers as we continue to their problems and are willing to solve it. However, because of the vague framework that they provide, that actually does not even protect the people in its essence, but rather just gives the people an ability to air out the problems and air out their concerns. We tell you that that's not really justice, panel. We tell you that even when you talk about the very argument of things like delayment, etc., what delays a woman from being able to deliver in a hospital safe and sound is not really because people protest at the hospital. It's simply because there is no hospital in the first place. We're telling you that we're able to implement that in our side of the house. They're not able to mitigate that in their side of the house, right? So, what do we see, panel? What did we do for you in this debate? One, we highlight that in their very vague framework that wasn't really provided. Empowerment of local elites poses a much larger threat when it comes to the argument of corruption in the first place. We're telling you that we are willing to concede to the problems because these problems do exist in the status quo, and we're willing to say, sure, let's solve them together. However, they haven't been able to state as to why we still need co-governance even in the world where we do solve the problems in the first place, right? We also tell you that not only are we willing to solve these problems, we're currently the most legitimate being to do so because we already have the power to implement this. We already have the power to empower this basically, right? And we also tell you that we also tell you that when it comes to the whole argument of whether these investments are actually good for not Canadians but for struggling, poor, and hungry Africans, right? People who need urgent development, that need urgent employment, that need urgent opportunities. In a world that this happens, who then better caters to these people? We feel like in our side of the house, we're able to do it faster and better, even when we solve their side of the issues one side of the house, but they fail to do that entirely. With that, I rest my case. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, both sides, team affirmative and team opposition. You're clearly the silver-tongued daredevils, having made it to the finals, and you have made your case. Now the judges will be stepping outside to deliberate, and may the best debaters win. All the best. You can smile at each other, shake hands, and be friends once again.
Another round of applause for our debaters.